Hey guys, tonight we slip back into the late Middle Ages, where castles loom against the dim horizon, their towers wrapped in fog and their windows glowing faintly with torchlight. Imagine yourself there, stone walls cold to the touch, tapestries barely softening the echo of footsteps, and the faint smell of wood smoke clinging to the air. You are not just anyone inside this fortress. No, tonight you are a medieval princess, born into privilege and ceremony, though spoiler alert, privilege doesn't always equal excitement. In fact, the day you are about to live through will be long, repetitive, and so quiet that you'll begin to wonder whether time itself has dozed off in the corner. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this lifestyle for more than a week without craving Netflix or at least a decent Wi-Fi signal. Still, it has its own sleepy rhythm, one that might just help you drift off tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first light of morning seeps into the chamber, not the bold gold we think of in storybooks, but a pale, hesitant gray that trickles through narrow windows. You're curled beneath thick woolen blankets, trying to stay warm against the persistent chill that never quite leaves a medieval castle. Stone is beautiful, but it's also mercilessly cold, especially when the fire in your chamber has burned low overnight. The air is sharp enough to make your breath cloud as you exhale, like you've been camping indoors. A gentle rustle reaches your ears, the sound of servants padding across the flagstones. They are up before you always. Some carry buckets of water, their iron handles clanging softly. Others shake out garments or poke at the embers in the hearth, coaxing a reluctant flame back to life. One maid draws the heavy curtains aside, letting that early grayness fall across your bed. She doesn't speak. Servants rarely do unless spoken to, but the message is clear. Your day has begun, whether you like it or not. You pull yourself up, reluctant, the weight of the blanket suddenly replaced by the weight of duty. And speaking of weight, let's note the bed itself. Not the feather-filled, spring-supported thing you might imagine, but a frame of carved wood with ropes or boards supporting a mattress stuffed with straw or wool. Not awful, not luxurious either. Sometimes nobles had what were called trundle beds stored beneath, where attendants or guards might sleep. Privacy, almost non-existent. You live surrounded by people who see your every yawn, every shuffle of the blanket. Now, historians still argue whether the first moments of a princess's day were more personal or more ceremonial. Some records suggest noblewomen woke quietly, stretching, perhaps even indulging in a whispered prayer before attendants bustled in. Others, particularly later medieval accounts, insist that from the very first stirrings, your life was watched and recorded, every gesture bound to protocol. What we do know for certain is that comfort and freedom ranked fairly low on the list of priorities. The cold makes you shiver as you set your feet on the rushes covering the floor. Rushes are a kind of straw or reed strewn across the flagstones and changed periodically, though not as often as you might like. Sometimes herbs were mixed in, meant to freshen the air, though they could also turn musty. In summer, the scent of dried lavender might rise beneath your toes. In winter, it's just brittle grass crunching underfoot. One of the attendants brings in a basin of water. It isn't steaming hot, luxury baths were rare, even for royalty, but it's enough for a quick splash across the face, a symbolic cleansing rather than anything thorough. You grimace because medieval water was rarely pristine, even inside castles. Wells and cisterns collected rainwater, but contamination was common. The wealthy often flavored their water with herbs or wine, partly for taste, partly for safety. So yes, even as a princess, Brushing your teeth with clean peppermint-flavored toothpaste was not on the agenda. Instead, you might chew on aromatic sticks or rinse with wine. Morning breath, medieval edition. While you freshen up, the castle itself is waking. You can hear the low murmur of voices from the great hall below, servants reporting to stewards, cooks clattering pots in the kitchens. Horses stamp in the stables, their hooves echoing through the courtyard. For you, however, the morning is deliberately hushed. Silence, after all, is part of your world. Not silence in the sense of complete stillness. There's always noise in a castle, but silence in the sense of suppressed voices, respectful whispers, nothing allowed to break the fragile dignity of your position. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval castles were often designed with acoustics in mind, not in the way theaters are, but in how sound carried through stone. Footsteps echoed, whispers traveled, and privacy was rare. Some nobles even exploited this, building listening chambers or architectural nooks where secrets could be overheard. So as you sit upright in bed, rubbing your eyes, there's a good chance someone is not only watching you but possibly hearing you mutter under your breath about the cold. Finally, attendants hand you a robe, thick and lined with fur if you're fortunate, wool if not. It takes the edge off the chill, though not by much. You shuffle to a chair near the hearth, where flames finally flicker again. Someone kneels to feed the fire with kindling, and the room begins to glow with that comforting dance of light. Shadows retreat, though the day outside remains stubbornly gray. And here, where the weight of your role creeps in again, you're not free to decide, maybe I'll sleep in today. Your schedule is dictated by ritual and by the needs of the court. If prayers are scheduled at dawn, then dawn it must be, whether or not you feel rested. And speaking of rest, let's pause on medieval sleep patterns. Historians debate whether people in this era commonly practiced what's now called segmented sleep. That is, sleeping for several hours, waking in the night to pray or talk, and then going back to sleep until dawn. Diaries and religious manuals hint that this was widespread, though others argue it depended on location, season, and status. For a princess, it's possible that you often woke at odd hours to say prayers, making dawn feel less like morning and more like yet another checkpoint in a restless cycle. The fire warms your hands, and you look out through the narrow slit of a window. The view isn't romantic. The medieval castle window was more arrow-slit than picture frame. You see mist clinging to the courtyard, guards shifting at their posts, and beyond the walls, a countryside just beginning to stir. Peasants are already at work while you're still pulling your robe tighter around your shoulders. There's a certain irony in that. While your life is supposedly one of privilege, much of it feels immobile, static, wrapped in ceremony. The peasants labor, the knights patrol, the servants bustle, but you sit, you wait. You endure the long, uneventful rhythm of being a symbol more than a person. And so, with a sigh that sends a puff of frosty breath curling upward, you prepare for the next step in your long day. Morning prayers, spoken in hushed tones before you've even had breakfast. The hush of the chamber lingers as you shuffle toward the chapel. Your robe drags softly across the rushes, the faint crackle of straw the loudest sound in the room. Servants guide you with gentle precision, like stagehands moving an actor to her next mark. The castle isn't bustling yet, not fully. A few coughs echo down stone corridors. The scuff of boots hints at distant movement, but your world at this moment is narrowed to one path, the short journey to prayer. The chapel is small compared to the grand cathedrals you've heard described, but still impressive in its way. Stone walls are softened with faded tapestries depicting saints, and a single stained glass window filters the dawn light into streaks of muted color. The glass isn't the jewel-toned marvel you'd see in Paris or Chartres. It's simpler, duller, but in this space, the faint glow feels magical enough. Beeswax candles flicker on the altar. their steady flames perfuming the air with a faintly sweet, resinous scent. You kneel on a cushion placed at the front. It's meant to soften the stone floor, though soften is generous. After a few minutes, the pressure on your knees seeps in, bone against stone, reminding you that comfort was never the point. You bow your head as the priest, already present, begins the murmured rhythm of morning prayers. His voice rises and falls in Latin phrases that you're expected to echo. You don't always understand every word. Few did. The cadence, however, is as familiar as breathing. Hours pass this way, or at least it feels like hours. Time in prayer has a way of stretching, each psalm unspooling slowly, each hymn lingering on long vowels. You clasp your hands tighter, the chill of the air giving way to the prickling warmth of effort. The monotony of it all is numbing and strangely soothing. In this age, religion is less about private faith and more about collective duty. As a princess, you're expected to embody piety. Even the way you fold your hands or lower your gaze is watched. Here's your historical fact for the night. Noblewomen in the later Middle Ages were often judged more by their perceived piety than by their beauty. Chroniclers recorded how many hours they spent in prayer, how often they fasted, how generously they gave alms. A devout princess made a kingdom look virtuous. A frivolous one, well, that could tarnish a dynasty's reputation. A quirky tidbit, though. Some noblewomen went so far as to measure their piety in bizarre ways. One countess was recorded as wearing a hair shirt beneath her fine gowns, a scratchy garment of rough animal hair meant to mortify the flesh. Imagine enduring that constant itch, hidden beneath layers of velvet and brocade. You, however, are spared such extremes, at least today. And yet, historians still argue whether this constant prayer life was heartfelt or merely symbolic. Was every whispered Ave Maria truly a moment of spiritual connection? Or was it another box ticked on the endless checklist of royal duty? With your knees aching and your stomach already grumbling for breakfast, you might guess the latter. The chapel is quiet except for the drone of chanting. Occasionally, the wind seeps in through cracks in the stone, carrying with it a low whistle that threads through the prayers. The priest continues steadily, his hands raised, his eyes fixed on a crucifix carved in wood and decorated with gilt paint. Your eyes wander there too, though your mind drifts elsewhere. You think of the warmth of your bed, the weight of your blankets, or maybe even the gardens beyond the walls where flowers will bloom in a few months' time. Distraction is dangerous, though. You are expected to maintain perfect composure. One lady-in-waiting stands slightly behind you, her role half devotional and half supervisory. If your head droops too low, if your hands slacken in their clasp, she will clear her throat softly. A subtle reminder, but one that cuts sharper than you'd like. And so you shift, straighten, breathe deeply, and return your focus to the chant. It's a battle not against enemies at the gate, but against boredom, against the ache in your knees, against your own restless mind. In a strange way, this makes sense. Discipline, after all, is a kind of warfare against the self. By the time the final hymn is sung, the gray of dawn has shifted to pale morning light. The stained glass now glows brighter, splashing color across the floor. The priest makes the sign of the cross, his robe swishing faintly as he bows. You rise, pins and needles shooting through your legs, and step back onto the rushes. The chapel feels colder now, emptier without the cadence of prayer. On your way out, you pause briefly at a reliquary, a small golden box said to contain a saint's bone, or perhaps just a splinter of wood from the true cross. Who can say? The truth of relics is murky at best, but to touch the box, to bow your head, feels like part of the performance. You do it without hesitation, even as a tiny voice in your head wonders how many such boxes exist in the world. If everyone were genuine, the saints would have had more bones than a dragon. The walk back to your chambers is slower now, your body heavy from prayer. Servants fall in around you, not quite guards, not quite companions, more like shadows ensuring you're never alone. That's the paradox of your existence, always watched, never free, and yet often profoundly lonely. You pass through a corridor lined with arrow slits, the wind sighing faintly through them. Outside, the world is waking in earnest. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer drifts up from the courtyard, and a cart rattles along the cobblestones, carrying firewood or grain. You glimpse peasants trudging with baskets, their lives hard and busy, and for just a moment you envy them. Their days may be grueling, but they are theirs. Yours, by contrast, are scripted. By the time you return to your room, the fire has been stoked higher. The warmth greets you like a reward for endurance. Your robe is removed by careful hands, and preparations begin for the next stage of your morning, dressing. But for now, you sink briefly into the chair by the hearth, eyes heavy, body sluggish, and mind caught between prayer and daydream. The chapel's silence clings to you still, a reminder that much of your life as a medieval princess is measured not in adventures or decisions, but in hours spent kneeling, whispering, waiting. The prayers may end, but the quiet never does. The hearth crackles, servants move briskly, and your brief pause by the fire is over almost as soon as it begins. Now comes a ritual that feels less like a necessity and more like a ceremony in itself: dressing. If you imagine slipping into a gown in 5 minutes flat, you're in for a reality check. Dressing as a medieval princess is not a casual affair. It is a performance, one that requires multiple hands, layers upon layers of fabric, and a strict adherence to rules that feel endless. First, the undergarments. These aren't glamorous, but they're essential. A chemise, basically a long linen shift, goes on first. It's simple, plain, and worn close to the skin, meant to protect the finer layers above from sweat and oils. Linen is chosen because it's relatively easy to wash, unlike wool or silk. The chemise feels cool against your skin at first, though warmth builds as layer after layer gets added. Attendants slide it over your head, tugging and smoothing until it falls correctly. You stand still, arms slightly outstretched, a living mannequin as they fuss and fold. Next comes the corset-like support garment. Here, where historians still argue, did medieval princesses wear structured corsets as we think of them today, or were their garments more loosely laced, resembling stays or bodices without rigid bonding? Evidence suggests that the stiff, ribbed corset was more of a Renaissance innovation, but some form of tight-laced support existed earlier. So here you are, inhaling sharply as ribbons cinch around your waist, not crushing but certainly restrictive. It keeps your posture upright, your back straight, and your breathing just a little shallower than you'd like. Quirky tidbit for you. Some accounts mention noblewomen being so tightly laced that fainting became almost fashionable. Whether this is exaggeration or truth, you're reminded that every adjustment of ribbon and knot is less about comfort and more about image. A princess should look regal, even if she can't bend over to pick something up. Over the chemise and bodice comes the gown. It isn't a single piece so much as an ensemble. First a kirtle, then a surcoat, maybe an overgown on top. Each layer adds weight. By the time attendants are finished, you're swaddled in wool, velvet, or silk, depending on the season and what your treasury can afford. The fabrics shimmer faintly in the firelight, colors rich but dictated by availability and symbolism. Deep blues, costly because of the imported dye, signal wealth. Crimson or gold conveys prestige. Even your wardrobe is propaganda, sending messages about your family's status and power. The sleeves deserve a chapter of their own. Some are long and trailing, brushing the ground as you walk. Others are tight at the wrist but slashed open to reveal fine fabric beneath. Attendants carefully lace, pin, and tie, ensuring that not a single fold looks out of place. Imagine standing stock, still while multiple people circle you like tailors adjusting a display. It's a process that demands patience, and you, by duty, supply it. Finally, the accessories. A girdle belt with tiny metal ornaments, perhaps a jeweled brooch, a rosary dangling from your waist. Your hair is smoothed, braided, and tucked beneath a headdress. Sometimes it's a wimple wrapping chin and neck in white linen. Other times it's a hennin, that tall, conical hat that modern Halloween costumes parody. You may feel faintly ridiculous, like your head is a spear tip, but fashion is fashion, and refusing it would not be an option. By the time the last pin is tucked and the final ribbon tied, you are encased in fabric from neck to toe. The weight is noticeable, 10, maybe 20 pounds of layered textiles. Sitting will not be graceful. Moving quickly is nearly impossible. But the end result is striking. You no longer look like the sleepy girl who crawled from bed at dawn. You look like a figure from a tapestry, an icon of nobility and restraint. That is, after all, the point. Let's pause here for a mainstream historical fact. Records show that noblewomen's clothing could consume enormous portions of household budgets. In one 14th century English household, garments for a noblewoman cost more annually than food for the entire retinue of servants. Clothing wasn't just personal adornment, it was politics stitched into fabric. Every seam reinforced alliances, wealth, and prestige. And here, where the scholarly debate comes in, historians still argue how much personal choice a princess had in what she wore. Did she ever say, "I like the red gown better than the blue"? Or was every selection pre-approved by stewards and family members to project a specific message? Some evidence suggests noblewomen did exert tastes, requesting fabrics from abroad or commissioning new designs. Others argue that princesses were so tightly controlled that their wardrobes functioned like uniforms. Either way, when you glance down at your own sleeves brushing the floor, you don't feel like the decision maker. As attendants step back, satisfied with their work, you take a breath or try to. The layers press in. Moving feels like navigating in slow motion. But this is how you will spend your day, a walking emblem of your dynasty's wealth. You shift toward the mirror. Well, not a modern mirror, a polished piece of metal, slightly warped, reflecting a faint, ghostly version of yourself. You lean closer, studying the lines of fabric, the pale oval of your face framed by the headdress. It doesn't look like you. It looks like someone older, colder, distant. And that's the idea. One lady-in-waiting steps forward with a final touch, a small vial of scented oil. She dabs it on your wrists, a faint whiff of rose mingling with the smoke of the fire. Perfume serves two purposes, masking the less-than-fresh air of the castle and signaling refinement. You smell like roses, even if the rushes on the floor smell like old hay. Now comes the awkward shuffle from the dressing chamber toward the next phase of your day. Your skirts swish, the hem catching on uneven stone. Attendants walk close behind, ready to adjust a fold, rescue a trailing sleeve, or pick up anything you drop. You don't walk alone, ever. And while the ceremony of dressing is over, the discomfort lingers, stitched into every seam. As you pass through the corridor, a draft sneaks up beneath the layers. You shiver despite the weight. Castles were notorious for their chill, even in summer. Heat rose poorly through stone, and fireplaces, while grand, warmed only a fraction of the space. You carry the cold with you, hidden beneath velvet and fur. In the great hall, a steward bows low, eyes flicking up to confirm your attire. You notice the faint nod of approval. Everything is in order. You are a princess, not because of who you are, but because of how you look. Without these layers, you'd be just another shivering young woman in a drafty castle. With them, you are untouchable, distant, regal. It's a curious contradiction. The clothing that elevates you also restricts you. You can't run in it, can't easily sit cross-legged by the fire, can't sprawl or laugh freely without tugging at seams. You are armored, but your armor is fabric, pins, and ritual. And so, as you settle onto a carved wooden chair, skirts billowing around you, attendants hovering like satellites, you realize the ceremony of dressing is not just about putting on clothes. It is about putting on identity, layer after layer, until the girl inside is hidden beneath wool, silk, and silence. The fire crackles, the hall hums faintly with distant voices, and your stomach growls softly. Next comes breakfast, though don't expect anything lavish. Your gown may scream luxury, but your morning meal will be as plain as bread dipped in broth. The chair beneath you feels solid, almost too solid, carved from oak and polished by countless hands over the years. Your skirts spill around its edges, pooling like fabric waterfalls, and you sit as still as possible because adjusting once you're seated is its own ordeal. Your stomach reminds you, with a low rumble, that it has been several hours since you last ate. First prayers, then dressing, now, finally, breakfast. But if you were hopping for a lavish spread of golden croissants and fresh fruit delivered on silver trays, brace yourself. The morning meal of a medieval princess, for all her status, is humble. Breakfast is not the grand affair of later centuries. It is a simple, practical interlude, more about sustenance than indulgence. A servant approaches, bowing, and places before you a trencher, a thick slice of yesterday's bread, hollowed slightly in the middle to act as an edible plate. Upon it rests a small portion of broth, thin and steaming, flavored faintly with onions, maybe a bone or two having boiled in it overnight. The scent is warm, if not especially enticing. Bread and broth, the staples of your rank, as much as they are the staples of the servant who placed it before you. Sometimes you receive butter or a wedge of cheese, maybe a piece of dried fruit if the stores allow. Eggs appear occasionally, though those are more often reserved for Lent debates. Yes, historians still argue whether medieval people considered eggs meat or not. For now, you focus on tearing bread with careful fingers, dipping it into the broth, and lifting it toward your lips. You eat in silence, every bite deliberate, every movement observed. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In much of medieval Europe, breakfast was considered unnecessary for healthy adults. It was associated with children, the elderly, the sick, or laborers who needed extra fuel for heavy work. For nobles, eating early in the day was sometimes seen as indulgent, even gluttonous. But by the later Middle Ages, records show that nobles, including princesses, were indeed served breakfast, though it was modest. The quirky tidbit. In some courts, physicians recommended a morning draft, basically a cup of watered wine, as part of breakfast. Wine, they argued, warmed the stomach and prepared digestion for the day. Imagine starting your day with a lukewarm sip of claret instead of coffee. Not quite the pep you're used to. Your cup is indeed placed before you, filled not with coffee but with a watered-down wine, pale and slightly sour. It is safer than water after all. You lift it carefully, sipping as though it were a delicate ritual, though it leaves a faint tang on your tongue. Across the hall, you hear the faint sounds of other members of the household eating. They are seated at lower tables, their own trenchers filled with simpler broth, coarser bread. The hall echoes with the scrape of spoons and the muted murmur of voices. But your own table is kept quieter, more formal. To be a princess is to eat in slow motion, watched by others, even when all you want is to mop up the broth with bread and slurp it down. Historians still argue how strictly etiquette governed these moments. Manuals of courtesy from the 14th and 15th centuries insist on rigid rules. Never chew with your mouth open, never wipe your mouth with your hand, never drink so noisily that others hear you swallow. Did every princess adhere to these all the time? Hard to say. You, however, must, because your reputation is woven from such details. As you chew, you glance around the hall. The walls are lined with tapestries depicting hunting scenes, saints, or family crests. They serve both to impress and to insulate, keeping the cold drafts from overwhelming diners. High above, beams stretch across the ceiling, smoke curling up toward them from the central hearth. Servants move steadily, refilling cups, carrying platters, removing crumbs. The rhythm is mechanical, the silence heavy. It is in these moments that the uneventfulness of your life weighs heavily. Breakfast is not conversation, not pleasure, not freedom. It is a duty, another scene in the performance. And yet there is something comforting in its predictability. Bread will always arrive, broth will always steam, wine will always sour your tongue. You can almost count the motions as you chew. Lift, dip, bite, swallow, pause. Over and over, the rhythm of a princess's morning meal. Outside, the world continues in contrast. The sounds of the courtyard drift in. The clang of buckets being filled at the well, the neigh of horses, the bark of a dog chasing geese. Somewhere a blacksmith hammers, the ringing carrying through the mist. You imagine peasants already in the fields, bending low to sow seeds or swinging tools against frozen earth. Their breakfast may not differ much from yours, though they eat it with less ceremony, more urgency. Your attendants hover quietly as you finish. One stands with a napkin, offering it discreetly when you're done. Another clears the trencher, which will be tossed to the dogs or the poor outside the gates. Nothing is wasted, not even stale bread. You sip the last of the wine, set down the cup, and fold your hands in your lap. There is a pause, a silence that stretches longer than you'd like before the steward bows again. Breakfast is concluded. You rise, skirts whispering against the rushes, and move toward the chamber where lessons await. The food sits heavy in your stomach, not unpleasant but not energizing either. It is fuel for the hours ahead, hours filled with tutors, embroidery hoops, and the steady hum of instruction. And so the day continues, the uneventful world of a medieval princess rolling forward, one spoonful of broth at a time. The lessons begin, and with them the next rhythm of your carefully controlled day. You step into a smaller chamber off the main hall, its walls hung with faded cloths to soften the stone, the light streaming in through narrow windows. A fire crackles at the far end, though the warmth doesn't quite reach you. A desk, ink pots, and carefully bound manuscripts await, along with the men and women whose job is to shape you into something more than a daughter, more than a sister, something useful to your family's ambitions. You sit at a carved chair, adjusting the folds of your gown so they don't wrinkle too harshly, and your tutor clears his throat. He is a grave man, beard neatly trimmed, eyes sharp behind the weight of years. He reminds you, as always, that learning is not for pleasure. It is for duty, for maintaining dignity, for preparing you to one day serve as the ornament of an alliance. In other words, no skipping lessons, no sighing too loudly when the ink stains your fingers. The morning studies begin with reading. A psalter is placed before you, its vellum pages smooth beneath your fingertips, letters painted in a hand so fine it feels like lace. You trace the Latin words slowly, mouthing them under your breath. Dominus illuminatio me. The words roll off your tongue with practiced effort. You understand them mostly, because the tutor insists on drilling you in Latin as though it were the only language worth knowing. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Noble girls, especially princesses, were often taught to read Latin scripture, but whether they became fluent is debatable. Some, like Elizabeth of York or Margaret of Scotland, were reputedly skilled readers, while others left only the faintest traces of literacy. The emphasis was rarely on creative thought but on piety, recitation, and maintaining an image of refinement. Still, there's a quiet pleasure in it. The turning of pages, the slow unfolding of words, the way the painted initials glow with gold leaf in the morning light, it's almost meditative. You lose yourself in the patterns of ink, forgetting for a moment the silent weight of the room. But the lesson does not stop with scripture. You move next to writing, dipping your quill into ink that seems determined to blot at the wrong moments. Your fingers cramp as you form careful letters on a scrap of parchment. Your tutor peers over your shoulder, correcting the angle, scolding when a line curves too much. Ink stains bloom on your cuffs, dark blotches that will never quite wash out. You sigh quietly because sighing too loudly would invite a lecture. The quirky tidbit. In some princesses' manuscripts, scholars have found doodles, little sketches of animals, flowers, even knights, likely drawn during moments of boredom. Perhaps by the princess herself, or perhaps by the weary scribe. Imagine a solemn Latin prayer book with a tiny cat chasing a mouse in the margin. Proof, if you needed it, that boredom and rebellion sneak into even the most sacred texts. Your lessons then shift to music. A lute is placed in your lap, its polished wood cool against your fingers. You pluck at the strings, the notes wobbling before settling into something almost harmonious. Your music mistress nods with approval, though you know she is not easily impressed. Songbooks are opened and you sing softly, your voice rising into the rafters. The melodies are not lively, but slow, solemn, drawn out like threads across a loom. Music, your tutor reminds you, is not just art. It is discipline. It is poise. It is yet another way to prove that you belong in the world of nobles, that you embody harmony in more than one sense. So you keep plucking, keep singing, even as your fingertips sting from the strings. Historians still argue how much education medieval princesses actually received. Was it rigorous? Was it symbolic? Some evidence suggests that daughters of kings received careful training in languages, history, and philosophy. Others point to letters complaining that noblewomen were often unlearned beyond basic prayers. The truth is probably somewhere in between, knowledge enough to impress, not always enough to wield power. Next comes the most dreaded lesson, embroidery. The hoop is set before you, the needle threaded with silk. Hours stretch as you bend over the fabric, coaxing tiny flowers into existence. Your stitches must be neat, even, and patient. Embroidery is proof of virtue, of diligence, of a steady hand. It is, unfortunately, also proof of how slowly time can crawl when you are confined to a chair. You prick your finger once, twice, muttering under your breath. A dot of blood appears on the linen and your governess tuts. You press a cloth against it, watching the red bloom faintly. No one speaks of it, but embroidery is one of those endless labors of noblewomen's lives. Altar cloths, banners, gifts for allies, all sewn patiently, day by day, stitch by stitch. As the hours creep by, you glance toward the narrow window. Outside, the sun has risen higher, spilling across the courtyard where men at arms drill with spears. Their shouts and clattering weapons carry faintly into the chamber. You envy them, not for their violence, but for their movement, their freedom to stride, shout, clash. Your world is a quieter one, hemmed in by ink, thread, and measured notes. Yet despite the monotony, there is pride in these lessons. You know that every neat stitch, every careful line of Latin, every note in tune will be observed by those who matter. A potential husband's envoys, a visiting bishop, even your own family. They will note whether you embody grace and discipline. To falter is to weaken your family's image. To excel is to strengthen it. When your tutors finally close their books and gather their tools, you feel both relief and weariness. The morning lessons have stretched long, demanding your attention in every direction. Your eyes ache from reading, your fingers throb from stitching, your voice is hoarse from singing. And yet the day is still young. You are dismissed at last, allowed to rise from your chair. You stretch slightly, discreetly, as you leave the chamber. Outside, the corridor feels cooler, the stone beneath your slippers grounding. Another block of duty completed. Another step in the still and silent life of a medieval princess. And so you move forward, toward the next moment waiting in its turn. Another ritual, another duty, another way the day slowly unfolds. You emerge from the chamber of learning, stiff from hours of sitting, the embroidered flowers half finished in your lap echoing in your mind like ghosts of wasted time. A servant gathers the work in your quills, carefully tucking everything away as though they were relics. You, however, are finally permitted something lighter, a walk. Not a long, rambling stroll through fields like a farmer's daughter might enjoy, no, but a measured promenade in the castle gardens or courtyards, watched at all times, your steps both deliberate and symbolic. The door to the outer yard opens and the fresh air strikes your face. You breathe in deeply, as though you might fill yourself with more than just oxygen, freedom perhaps, or at least the illusion of it. The world outside is a patchwork of stone walls, clipped hedges, gravel paths, and if you are lucky, a glimpse of rolling hills in the distance. You step out with your ladies-in-waiting behind you, their eyes following, their footsteps echoing like shadows that never let you wander alone. The gardens themselves are not vast, but they are orderly. Low box hedges create neat patterns, and herbs, sage, rosemary, lavender, grow in carefully tended beds. The scent rises in the air, sharp and comforting at once. You brush your fingertips against a sprig of mint, rubbing the leaves, then bring your hand discreetly to your nose. A small rebellion to enjoy something as simple as smell. It is mid-morning now, and the sun catches on the dew that lingers in shaded corners. Birds flicker overhead, sparrows darting between the eaves. The courtyard well glimmers faintly, its rope coiled neatly. A maid draws water, the bucket clanking, and for a moment you envy her, envy the sweat, the freedom of movement, even the sore muscles that come from labor. Your own body is too often a statue, rehearsed and composed. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Many medieval castles and palaces were designed with enclosed gardens specifically for noblewomen, sometimes called pleasure gardens. These were private spaces, walled off, where women of rank could walk safely, away from prying common eyes. They were often filled with herbs not only for medicine but also for symbolism. Rosemary for remembrance, lavender for purity, thyme for courage. But the walk is not entirely aimless. This is the time when you must be seen. Courtiers linger, bowing slightly as you pass, and you return nods with the grace drilled into you since childhood. Your governess reminds you, silently, with a raised brow, that you must hold your head at a particular angle. You obey because disobedience has no place here. Sometimes, when the weather permits, a falconer arrives, carrying a hooded bird upon his glove. He bows, shows you the falcon, its sharp eyes hidden beneath the leather hood. You stroke its feathers gently, marveling at the tension coiled inside that small, fierce body. Falconry is technically part of noble training, though princesses often touch it only lightly. You never fly the bird yourself, but you are allowed to watch, sometimes to hold, as though merely touching the feathered predator lends you some echo of its freedom. A quirky tidbit. In the 14th and 15th centuries, falconry manuals were sometimes written with strict rules about who could fly which bird. Kings were assigned eagles or gerfalcons, princes peregrines, and women, particularly noblewomen, smaller hawks like merlins. It was hierarchy layered upon hierarchy, even in the skis. Historians still argue whether these manuals were actually followed or were more symbolic, because in practice, if a lord or lady had access to a certain bird, they often used it regardless of rank. But mostly, your walk is less falcons and more flowers. The gravel crunches softly underfoot, the rhythm hypnotic. Sometimes you are joined by another noblewoman, perhaps your sister or a cousin, and you exchange small talk about the weather, about the state of embroidery, about who sneezed in chapel. Conversations are shallow, rarely allowed to wander into dreams or frustrations. You keep your voice low, laughter softer still, because walls have ears and gossip flows faster than rivers. Every so often you catch a glimpse of the outer world, villagers at a distance, carrying baskets, leading oxen along muddy tracks. Children chase one another, their laughter piercing across the air. You watch them from behind the wall or latticework, half curious, half detached. Their lives look rougher, dirtier, harsher, but freer too. You wonder if they envy you as much as you sometimes envy them. The debate of historians arises here. Just how confined were noblewomen? Some argue that they were largely prisoners of etiquette, restricted to gardens, halls, and chapels. Others suggest that noblewomen, especially princesses, traveled often between estates, accompanied hunts, and managed wide domains. The truth likely varied with personality, family, and circumstance. For you, though, it feels like the walls are always too near. The walk stretches on, broken by pauses at benches carved of stone or wood. You sit, smoothing your gown, hands folded neatly, and watch as the wind stirs the leaves. Your ladies whisper behind you, occasionally daring a quiet giggle. You pretend not to hear. The breeze lifts your veil slightly, and you savor that sensation, small as it is. The sun warms your cheeks, making your eyelids heavy. You could almost sleep here in this garden, in this quiet moment between lessons. Sometimes the walk includes a detour to the chapel. You step inside, where the air cools instantly, heavy with incense. Candles flicker before saints' images, their painted eyes gazing down. You kneel briefly, murmuring a prayer, not always heartfelt, but always expected. You pray for your family, for peace, for health, though secretly you might slip in a prayer for excitement, for change, for some unannounced miracle that would shatter the monotony. As noon draws closer, the walk comes to its end. You rise once more, following the path back toward the keep. The servants open the heavy wooden door, and you step inside. The cool dimness replaces the brightness of the garden. Already, the world narrows again to stone corridors and carved beams, to whispered instructions and measured duties. But for a little while, at least, you had the sky above you, the sense of herbs and the brush of wind against your veil. For a little while, you tasted something close to freedom, even if it was just a carefully curated illusion. You return to your chambers, preparing for the midday meal, your footsteps steady, your composure unbroken. The still and silent life of a medieval princess presses onward, each hour its own small performance, each duty a stitch in the endless fabric of expectation. The echo of your footsteps from the garden fades into the stone corridors, and soon enough the great hall summons you. The midday meal waits, not a feast, but not the gruel of peasants either. It sits somewhere in between, wrapped in formality, seasoned with protocol, and always performed under watchful eyes. You move with deliberate grace, the rustle of your gown announcing you before the sight of your face does. The great hall itself looms vast, its timber beams blackened by decades of smoke. Sunlight pierces through narrow windows, casting bars of gold across the rushes strewn on the floor. The smell is a mixture of roasted meats, damp straw, and candle wax, with an undertone of humanity that no herb or incense can disguise. At the far end, the high table stretches beneath a canopy, the seat of honor for your father, the king, or your mother, the queen, should they be present. You, as a princess, belong close to them, but not quite at the center. Never the star, always the orbit. You take your seat with trained precision, smoothing your gown, folding your hands, and lifting your chin. Around you, nobles chatter softly, servants glide like shadows, and minstrels strum their lutes in a corner, their tunes more background hum than true entertainment. The hall is not quiet, but it is not lively either. It feels more like a stage before an audience that has grown tired of the same play performed endlessly. A mainstream historical fact to ground us here. Meals in a medieval noble household were not merely times to eat, but public events, loaded with ritual. Dining was a chance to display wealth through silver plate, elaborate dishes, and imported spices. The act of eating was an extension of status, Everything from the seating arrangement to the size of the goblet reflected rank. For a princess, the meal was less about nourishment and more about demonstrating refinement. Your plate arrives, carried by a page. It is not yours to serve yourself. Slices of roasted fowl, bread trenchers, perhaps a spoonful of pottage rich with peas and herbs and sometimes fish, especially if it is a fasting day. The food smells good, but you know better than to dig in with gusto. Instead, you nibble neatly, sipping watered wine in tiny, rehearsed sips. And here comes a quirky tidbit. Medieval people did not use forks the way we do today. Knives and spoons were common, but fingers were also acceptable tools, provided they were used daintily. Nobles often shared drinking vessels and even trenchers, which means that despite all the pomp, dining could be surprisingly intimate and messy. Imagine sharing a chunk of bread with the nobleman who has just sneezed into his sleeve. Not exactly the glamorous banquet modern films depict. But etiquette governs even this. You must not eat too quickly nor too slowly. You must not let crumbs cling to your lips. And above all, you must not speak too much or too loudly. Conversation at meals is permitted, yes, but in moderation, and it must circle safe topics. The weather, recent hunts, court gossip carefully filtered through discretion. Anything else, politics, scandal, whispers of rebellion, is reserved for the king and his council, not for you. Yet even here, historians still argue whether princesses were silent ornaments or subtle participants in diplomacy. Some letters suggest that princesses were trained to offer polite conversation, small phrases in foreign tongues, or clever observations to impress visiting envoys. Others paint them as silent presences, eyes lowered, their voices rarely heard above a murmur. Perhaps the truth, once again, lies in the shifting sands between. The hall hums around you. Servants weave between tables with pitchers, refilling goblets. Dogs wait at the edges, eyes fixed on scraps that might fall. Somewhere, a bard recites a tale of Charlemagne or King Arthur, his voice competing with the clatter of knives and the occasional burst of laughter from the men at the lower tables. You smile faintly at the right moments, a mask as polished as the goblets. You may be served exotic delicacies, spiced almonds, candied ginger, maybe even oranges if the traders have come through. They are sweet, sharp, and strange, each bite reminding you that the world is vast beyond these walls, filled with lands you will likely never see except in marriage or rumor. These flavors are little postcards of the unseen, and you treasure them silently, though you dare not lick the sugar from your fingers like a child. As the meal continues, you feel the weight of eyes upon you, always the eyes. Courtiers measure your behavior, envoys judge your posture, ladies in waiting silently compare your composure to their own. Even the servants, though deferent, notice more than you think. To be a princess at table is not to eat but to perform. Your every movement is an extension of the realm's dignity, whether you are lifting a spoon or dabbing your lips with linen. Now comes the ritual of washing hands. Before and after the meal, basins of water are brought, often perfumed with herbs. A servant pours gently as you hold your hands over the basin, another offering a towel. Cleanliness is as much about symbolism as hygiene here. It shows refinement, order, and a respect for divine creation. You wonder sometimes if the peasants washing their hands in cold, muddy streams laugh at your perfumed basins. When the main meal ends, desserts arrive, if they can be called that. Marchpane shaped like castles, pears poached in wine, or honey cakes sticky and fragrant. You take small bites, though secretly you want more, especially the marchpane with its almond sweetness melting on your tongue. But greed is unprincess-like, so you restrain yourself. At last grace is said, hands are folded, and the hall quiets. The king or queen rises, and everyone follows suit. The meal dissolves back into ceremony. You rise too, smoothing your gown once more, smiling faintly, head held high. The food may have filled your stomach, but it has not satisfied your hunger for freedom, for laughter, for unguarded life. You leave the hall in a procession, back into the labyrinth of corridors, back toward the waiting duties that the afternoon will bring. Another performance concluded, another hour consumed by ritual. The day stretches on, steady and silent, each moment polished like the silver on the table, reflecting order while hiding the hunger beneath. The air shifts as you step out of the echoing great hall, leaving behind the clatter of goblets and the drone of minstrels. Afternoon light slants through arrow-slit windows, painting the corridor in long golden stripes, and you are quietly ushered toward the chambers where your tutors wait. You know the pattern by now. Dining leads to learning, and learning leads to another round of stillness. Education for a medieval princess is a performance just as much as dining. The expectation is not that you become a scholar, but that you are polished into a living ornament of the court, capable of speaking with grace, reading prayers with reverence, and perhaps, on rare occasions, surprising a guest with a fragment of poetry. Yet the education is narrow, like a path hemmed in by thorn hedges. Step too far, and the thorns remind you this garden was never meant for wandering. You are led into a small solar, warmed by the glow of a single fire. Here sit your tutors, a priest, a stern man with ink-stained fingers, and an older noblewoman who seems to carry every rule of etiquette in her gaze. They are your compass, charting the boundaries of what you may know and what you must never question. A mainstream historical fact: medieval princesses were often literate, at least enough to read scripture, recite prayers, and correspond in letters. Catherine of Aragon, for example, was highly educated, schooled in Latin, philosophy, and the classics. Yet not every princess enjoyed such breadth. Many were taught simply enough to fulfill their roles as pious wives and gracious companions. The depth of their learning depended on the ambitions of their parents and the politics of their futures. You sit at a small table, parchment before you, quill poised. Your lessons begin with Latin, the language of the church and diplomacy. The words scratch across the page, phrases of scripture you copy dutifully. You mouth the syllables, careful to pronounce them correctly. The priest nods, correcting you sharply if your accent slips. To you, the letters blur into shapes more than meaning, but still you persevere. Quirky tidbit: medieval ink was often made with oak galls, the strange round growths found on oak trees caused by wasp larvae. The ink's rich black hue came from this peculiar mixture of nature and necessity. So when you dip your quill, you are, in a way, writing with the residue of tiny insect battles. Not that anyone tells you this, of course. They would never allow such trivia to cheapen the solemnity of your script. After Latin, the noblewoman steps forward with a book of psalms. She has you read aloud, voice steady, tone reverent. Each verse is more than words. It is training in performance. You must sound devout, controlled, ladylike, even when your tongue stumbles. She watches your posture as much as your pronunciation, ready to scold if your back bends or your hands fidget. To her, holiness is as much about the angle of your chin as the purity of your soul. Historians still argue whether medieval princesses had access to more secular learning, mathematics, astronomy, or even natural philosophy. Some chronicles suggest that noble daughters absorbed knowledge alongside their brothers in the nursery before their paths diverged. Others imply that the boundaries were rigid, that a princess's mind was rarely fed beyond what was deemed useful for prayer, piety, and polite conversation. It is one of those tantalizing gaps in history where the silence speaks almost louder than the facts. Your lessons continue, embroidery patterns brought forth, threads of silk in bright colors laid across your lap. The noblewoman instructs you in stitches, chain, cross, satin. The rhythm of the needle is soothing, but the repetition dulls your thoughts. Embroidery, after all, is less about creativity and more about patience, obedience, and producing tapestries that proclaim your family's piety. A half-stitched Lamb of God stares back at you, eternal and woolly, as if mocking your slow progress. The priest interrupts with music. A small harp rests by the chair, strings freshly tuned. You pluck them gently, following his instructions. The melody is simple, repetitive, designed more to charm guests than to move hearts. Your fingers stumble occasionally and the priest frowns, but no one expects you to be a virtuoso. Just competent, just decorative. That, after all, is the theme of your education, to be just enough but never too much. And then comes the etiquette lesson. The noblewoman arranges your hands, instructs you in the art of the curtsy, the angle of the bow, the modulation of your voice. You rehearse greetings as though they are prayers, each phrase smoothed until it carries no rough edge of individuality. You are taught how to receive compliments without vanity, how to dismiss servants without cruelty, how to walk as though you float rather than tread. Every gesture is memorized until it feels less like living and more like acting. Occasionally, there are diversions. A visiting scholar might recite poetry, or a musician might perform more elaborate pieces, offering glimpses of a world of knowledge just beyond your reach. You listen intently, absorbing fragments of beauty, storing them away like secret treasures. In those moments, you feel the thrum of curiosity, the ache of longing for more than psalms and stitchwork. But the lessons return swiftly to their narrow grooves, and your longing must tuck itself away, hidden beneath embroidery hoops and harp strings. Time stretches. The fire hisses softly. Pages of parchment pile slowly. Your neck aches from bending over script. Your fingers sting from pricked needles. You suppress a sigh. Princesses do not sigh after all. Instead, you smile faintly, hands folded neatly when commanded to pause. The tutors nod approvingly, satisfied not by your joy but by your obedience. Sometimes you are reminded of your future. Lessons in household management, reminders that one day you may oversee estates, servants, and kitchens. The noblewoman speaks of duty, of the need to maintain order and piety in your husband's hall. These lessons are practical, but they also underline the inevitability of your fate. You will move from one hall to another, from one performance to another, carrying your polished manners like armor. The bells toll in the distance, marking the passage of the afternoon. Lessons wind down at last. The priest gathers his books, the noblewoman her embroidery frames. They bow slightly, dismissing you with words of duty and encouragement. You rise, curtsy, and slip out once more into the corridors. The firelight fades behind you, and with it the endless drone of Latin verbs and needlepoint lambs. You carry with you the strange duality of your education. You are trained to seem perfect, but never to feel free. You know the words of prayers, the stitches of banners, the notes of songs, but you do not know the taste of freedom beyond these walls, nor the wild questions that scholars debate in hushed corners. You are schooled in being, not in becoming. The corridors are quiet as you walk, your slippers whispering on stone. Outside, the world goes on. Peasants work fields, traders haggle in markets, shepherds whistle to their flocks. They learn by doing while you learn by performing. You wonder briefly which of you is truly educated, but the thought fades, smothered by habit. After all, a princess's thoughts are not meant to wander too far. The day edges on, silent and still, and you prepare yourself for whatever performance comes next. The air of the castle feels different once your formal lessons end. It is quieter, less tightly bound by the rigid expectations of tutors and priests, but not freer, not truly. What replaces the classroom drills is something softer, slipperier, the constant murmur of whispers. Court gossip drifts like smoke through every hallway, seeping under heavy oak doors, curling around rush-strewn floors, and filling every chamber where people gather. As a princess, you are both the subject and the spectator of this whispering world. You hear things not meant for your ears, and you are shielded from truths you most need to know. Gossip is everywhere, yet it is carefully portioned like watered wine. And so your afternoons pass in the haze of half-secrets, murmured rumors, and the awareness that your life is not your own story, but a chapter in the negotiations and ambitions of others. Life in a medieval castle was in many ways monotonous. Endless meals, prayers, and rehearsals of etiquette. Yet gossip added the shimmer of unpredictability. What was spoken in corridors or whispered during embroidery sessions mattered more than the lessons you studied so dutifully. Gossip was political currency. Alliances were formed and broken not just on the battlefield or in royal courts, but in the hush of ladies' chambers, in the pauses between prayers, and at the end of banquets when tongues loosened with wine. For women of the court, especially princesses, gossip was often the only window into the true dynamics of power. You sit with your ladies-in-waiting in the solar embroidery hoops on your laps and hear them trade stories like merchants barter goods. One murmurs of a night's secret dalliance. Another speaks of a noble family suddenly fallen out of favor. Every stitch in the fabric is matched by a stitch in the web of rumor. Sometimes the tailies are trivial, who stumbled at dinner, who mispronounced Latin in chapel. But sometimes they are weighty, touching on marriages, inheritances, or betrayals that could shift kingdoms. Of course, you are not immune. In fact, you are often at the center of these hushed conversations. The color of your gown at a feast, the way you smiled or failed to smile. At a visiting envoy, the way your harp notes faltered. Each tiny moment becomes material for speculation. Did you lower your eyes too quickly? Did you linger too long when dancing with a noble youth? Did you rise from the table before the queen? For you, these whispers are like shadows that move whenever you turn your head. You cannot catch them, but you always feel them trailing you. Sometimes your ladies repeat them to you directly, softening the sharp edges. Other times you sense their weight in the way people glance, or in the way conversations suddenly hush when you enter the room. The cruel truth is that gossip shapes your reputation, and reputation shapes your fate. You may live quietly, dutifully, perfectly, but one poorly timed laugh or a misinterpreted gesture could plant a seed of suspicion that follows you for years. Perhaps the most persistent thread of gossip is about your future marriage. Who will you wed? What alliance will you be bartered into? Will you be sent across the sea to a land you do not know, to live among strangers and speak in a tongue you barely learned? Marriage is not romance. It is politics in silk wrappings. The castle buzzes with speculation. Perhaps you will be matched with a powerful duke, perhaps with a neighboring king's son, perhaps with an older widower seeking to bind your family's loyalty. Each possibility is whispered with certainty one week, only to vanish and be replaced by another rumor the next. You never know what to believe. The courtiers and ladies speculate endlessly, but no one tells you directly. You are, after all, the piece being moved on the board, not the hand that moves it. You imagine yourself as a pawn in a game of chess, valued for what you can bring, but never for what you are. Historical example: Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most famous queens of the Middle Ages, was first married to Louis VII of France for political alliance, then to Henry II of England, shaping centuries of conflict between those two realms. Her personal feelings mattered far less than the treaties and territories her hand in marriage represented. You, like her, are a token of power, though perhaps destined for a quieter fate. Whispering is not random. It follows the structures of power. The servants carry gossip up the social ladder, passing observations from kitchens and corridors. The noblewomen refine it, giving it polish and interpretation. The men in council chambers twist it into strategy. Each layer adds or subtracts until the rumor is no longer truth, but something sharper, something more useful. You once overheard two servants in the stairwell arguing in hushed voices over whether the king's steward was stealing grain. By the time the rumor reached the solar, it had transformed into a tale of entire villages starving. By the time it reached the Great Hall, it was a reason to remove the steward from office. This, you realize, is how power works, not only with armies or taxes, but with the simple act of retelling a story. Your role is not to spread gossip, but to absorb it carefully. You are expected to nod, to appear attentive, but never to reveal too much. Sometimes, though, you use gossip as your quiet rebellion, storing bits of information, piecing together truths that no one would speak plainly to you. When your tutors bore you with Latin conjugations, your mind sometimes drifts to the rumors you've heard. How this nobleman has fallen into debt, how that family has angered the queen, how one envoy looked too intently at your sister during mass. You connect threads, silently weaving your own map of the court. It is not official knowledge, but it is the closest you come to understanding the real world beyond your embroidery. And yet, for every whisper you hear, there are countless secrets kept from you. Discussions of war, of strategy, of treaties. All these happen in council chambers barred to women. You know only what filters through, distorted, diluted, reshaped by gossip. This half-knowledge can be tormenting. Sometimes you suspect that your very future is being decided in those locked rooms while you sit, stitching a lamb onto a banner, listening to scraps of rumor. You are the subject of the whispers, but not the speaker, not the decider. You are shaped by gossip, yet powerless to shape it. As the afternoon darkens, the whispers fade into the deeper shadows of the castle. Evening bells toll, drawing people toward prayers and supper. Yet the gossip does not end. It only rests, ready to rise again with the next misstep, the next faint smile, the next slip of the tongue. For you, gossip is both company and cage. It fills your days with something to wonder about, but it also reminds you of your lack of control. You live in a world of echoes, never the voice that begins the rumor, but always the chamber where it resounds. You return to your chamber, candles flickering in the draught, and wonder what will be whispered of you tomorrow. Perhaps your silence at dinner will be called arrogance. Perhaps your laughter will be deemed improper. Perhaps nothing at all will be said, and that too is a kind of erasure. The gossip drifts always like smoke, insubstantial, ungraspable, yet heavy in its consequences. You breathe it in because you must, because the air of the castle is steeped in it, because to live as a princess is to live not only with stone walls and golden gowns, but with the constant, quiet, dangerous hum of other people's words. And so, once again, your day folds into silence, into the stillness where whispers linger long after the voices have gone. The walls of the castle grow taller the longer you stare at them, and though you walk the same paths each day, the courtyard where laundry hangs limp on wooden frames, the dim chapel where incense clings to the stone, the narrow galleries where your slippers click against uneven tiles, you begin to feel as though the spaces are shrinking around you. Isolation creeps in not like a sudden storm, but like mist, soft and slow, until you cannot remember the last time you felt truly free. You are never truly alone, of course. There is always a maid watching, a guard at the stairwell, a servant hovering just beyond the door. But you are lonely in ways that press against your ribs and settle into the hollow of your chest. Your days are built from repetitions, each one layering over the other until time becomes less a line and more a circle. You rise, you pray, you eat the same bread and broth, you sew or read or repeat your language lessons, and you wait for evening bells. There is little variation, save for the weather. Rain streaks across the leaded glass one day, while another day's sunlight filters in so brightly it almost hurts your eyes. Sometimes you stand by the window and trace shapes in the condensation, pretending for a brief moment that you could step through the glass into the world beyond. But the guards at the gates remind you of the truth. This castle is not only your home, it is your boundary. Your letters are your only escape, though even they are carefully managed. You write to distant relatives, to your mother's sisters, to a cousin who has already been married off, and the parchment carries away fragments of your thoughts. Replies come back weeks later, carrying news of feasts you will never attend, births of children you will never hold, and rumors of alliances you barely understand. Yet each letter, no matter how brief, feels like a lifeline tossed across the moat. Historians still argue whether most princesses were allowed free correspondence, or if their words were intercepted by watchful fathers and confessors. But you know the anxiety that strikes each time you press your seal into wax, wondering who will open your words, and whether your private longing will be deemed inappropriate. The silence of the corridors becomes heavy. Sometimes you wander them simply to hear your own footsteps echo back to you, proof that you still exist in more than just duties. You pause at tapestries and study the faces stitched there, knights and ladies caught forever in scenes of hunting or battle, their stories frozen while yours feels trapped. You wonder whether the women who stitched them centuries ago felt the same emptiness. Did they pull needle through fabric and dream of worlds they would never see? Did they leave tiny mistakes in the weave, not from clumsiness, but to leave behind a trace of themselves? You find strange comfort in the small oddities of life within the walls. The way the same old steward sneezes every morning when the rushes are swept, as though he too has been bound into ritual. The sound of the kitchen cats fighting over scraps, their yowls echoing louder than any music in the hall. The faint crack in the chapel's stone pillar that no mason ever seems to repair, as if the building itself resists perfection. These quirks are like secret companions, proof that even in stillness there is imperfection, and even imperfection is alive. At night, when the castle grows quiet and even the guards grow weary, you sit awake and trace patterns on the bedclothes with your fingers. You count the knots in the wood beams above you. You try to remember the last time you laughed freely, not politely, not carefully, but with abandon. It is harder than you expect. Perhaps it was when you were much younger, running in the gardens before anyone reminded you to hold your skirts properly. Perhaps it was with a maid who has long since been dismissed. Memory blurs in the silence, and you begin to fear that joy might be something you will only ever glimpse, never hold. Yet for all the heaviness, you carry on. You walk, you pray, you write, you wait. Life is not dramatic. It is not filled with the sweeping gestures you once heard about in songs. It is the small, measured stillness of a princess kept apart, a stillness so deep it hums like a soft background note you can never escape. And though you do not know it, that silence will shape you more than any feast or battle ever could. The days blur into each other until you cannot quite tell one from the next, and yet each carries a faint thread of sameness, woven so tightly that even your dreams begin to echo them. You rise before dawn because that is what is expected, the air still chill enough to sting your skin as you slip from your bed. The chamber is dim, the shutters closed, the only sound the faint scratch of a mouse in the rafters. A maid lights a candle, and in its flickering glow you begin again, washing in a basin of cold water, pulling layers of fabric over your shoulders, arranging your hair so that it conforms to the rules of modesty. By the time you step into the hallway, the stone floor already seeping its dampness into your shoes, you feel the weight of the castle pressing down on you again. Your tutors remind you that knowledge is a kind of crown, though it rarely feels like one. Hours pass with you bent over manuscripts, your eyes following the elegant lines of Latin script. You recite prayers, you translate phrases, you practice polite responses in languages you may one day need for diplomacy. Historians still argue whether most medieval princesses truly mastered these lessons, or if the appearance of learning was more important than the reality. But either way, your teachers never let you forget that you are expected to embody more than yourself. You are a vessel for your family's honor, and that honor must be clothed in refinement, even if the process feels endless and dry. It is not only books, though. Needlework fills your hours, and the rhythm of pulling thread through fabric is both soothing and suffocating. Each stitch is small, controlled, a reminder of the control that frames your entire life. Sometimes you prick your finger and a bead of blood blossoms against the linen. You dab it away quickly, pretending it never happened, though you cannot help but wonder if that little stain is the most vivid thing you have created all day. Women centuries from now will study these embroidered works as art, and perhaps they will imagine the calm, patient hands that made them. If only they could feel the restless energy that churns beneath your stillness. The meals offer no escape from routine either. Bread, broth, a bit of cheese, sometimes roasted meat if the kitchens are lucky. Always eaten with ceremony, never with spontaneity. You chew slowly because you must nod politely at those around you and keep your thoughts carefully measured. A joke bubbles to your lips now and then, but you swallow it down, remembering the one-time laughter escaped you too loudly and the disapproving looks that followed. Still, you keep track of small absurdities. Like the steward who always manages to spill a drop of wine while pouring, or the kitchen boy who scratches his ear before every bow, as if nervousness itself were an itch. These tiny details are what make the repetition bearable, even amusing, if only to you. Sometimes visitors come, and those days feel like a crack in the monotony. Noble ladies from nearby lands, their veils and gowns trailing long behind them, whisper about their estates, their children, their ailments. You smile, you nod, you let them imagine you are listening, though most of the time you are quietly cataloging their gestures, their jewelry, the way they try to impress each other. The truth is, their stories are as repetitive as your own, and yet the intrusion of their voices is enough to shift the atmosphere for a day or two. When they leave, the silence seems even heavier, as if the castle resents the interruption and must punish you with extra stillness. One of the strangest feelings is the sense of being watched, always watched, even when no one is in the room. You begin to suspect the walls themselves carry eyes, that the tapestries sigh when you pass, that the saints painted on chapel panels are tallying your movements. It is absurd, and you laugh at yourself for it, but the sensation never entirely fades. Perhaps it is because you know that everything you do, no matter how small, will be remembered by someone, repeated later in whispers, and woven into the tapestry of your reputation. Historians may never know whether such constant scrutiny was paranoia or reality, but to you, it feels like living inside a story that is being written in real time by people you cannot see. Evenings come with the same rhythm. Bells in the distance, the smell of smoke in the halls, servants carrying lamps that push back the shadows only slightly. You retreat to your chamber, where the bed is piled high with heavy covers, and you prepare to wait out the hours until sleep takes you. Some nights you imagine yourself beyond these walls, slipping into the forest, hearing the crunch of leaves underfoot, tasting wild berries plucked with your own fingers. Other nights you think of ships, wooden, creaking, cutting across a dark sea, carrying you to places where no one knows your name. These dreams carry you, but when morning comes, the same walls greet you again, and the cycle begins anew. And so you keep moving forward quietly, deliberately, inside the stillness. You laugh to yourself at times at the thought that future people might imagine your life as one of constant luxury and delight. If only they could see the endless hours of embroidery, the watered-down broth, the stiff greetings, and the aching silence. It is not drama or tragedy that shapes you. It is this monotony, this careful waiting, this subtle erosion of time. That is the true inheritance of a medieval princess. You wake before dawn again, not because you wish to, but because the castle itself insists upon it. The air is damp and cold, carrying the faint smell of last night's fire long extinguished. A maid pulls the shutters back, letting in the pale gray light, and you are reminded that another day has arrived that will look very much like yesterday. The sounds outside the window are familiar. A rooster too eager to announce the morning, a cartwheel groaning as it rolls across uneven stone, the shuffle of servants already about their work. The stillness of your chamber cracks, but only slightly, like a whisper more than a song. You rise and dress in the same layers, the same ties and fastenings, each motion so well practiced it no longer requires thought. Once again, the mirror, polished metal, not glass, returns your reflection to you, but it is flat, distorted, a blurred reminder that you are expected to appear perfect without truly seeing yourself clearly. Historians still argue whether such mirrors gave medieval women any real sense of their image, or if they were mostly symbolic. You cannot help but think that the lack of sharpness suits the life you are living, a life where edges are blurred, choices dulled, and outlines drawn for you rather than by you. The morning hours belong to lessons, reading and reciting psalms, rehearsing courtly manners, correcting posture until your shoulders ache from holding them just so. The words of philosophers and church fathers spill into your ears, some profound, some tedious, all delivered with the same tone of authority that allows no argument. Sometimes you wonder if the tutors themselves are as weary of this as you are, if they too dream of escape, though they are careful never to reveal it. They warn you about idleness, about how a princess must never allow her mind to wander. And yet, it is in those stolen moments of wandering thought that your imagination feels most alive. Midday arrives with ceremony. The hall fills with movement, but even in its bustle there is an order that drains spontaneity from the air. Platters of bread, bowls of pottage, roasted meats, each dish is placed carefully, each servant timed in their motion as if choreographing a ritual. You eat slowly, surrounded by courtiers and relatives, all of whom measure their words with precision. Gossip sometimes crackles beneath the surface, but it is carefully cloaked in politeness. Once you hear someone whisper about a noble far away whose marriage ended in scandal, and for a brief moment, your blood quickens at the hint of something unpredictable. But it passes quickly. The conversation folds neatly back into safer subjects. After the meal, you turn to the inevitable embroidery. The cloth spreads across your lap like a patient that must be tended. Stitch after stitch, the picture takes form, saints, flowers, geometric borders. Every thread is a little timeline of its own, and as the needle slips in and out, you feel the hours dissolving into quiet monotony. Sometimes the patterns blur before your eyes, and you imagine the threads rearranging themselves into secret messages only you can read. Maybe one day, some scholar will point to your handiwork and declare its beauty, but for you it is simply another day spent binding time into fabric. Afternoons stretch long. You sometimes take a walk in the gardens, where the neat rows of herbs and flowers create a fragile sense of order. The sun warms your skin, and the scent of rosemary and lavender floats in the air. Yet even here, the space is enclosed, walled, a reminder that even nature is permitted only in carefully curated pieces. You long for wildness, for woods and rivers, but the garden is what you are allowed. You pause by a fountain, watching the water spill and ripple. It moves freely, though always within its stone basin, and you cannot help but see yourself in its confinement. Evenings drift in with shadows and the drone of prayer. The chapel smells of incense, thick and almost overwhelming, and your voice joins the others in chants that echo against stone walls. You close your eyes, not entirely sure whether you are reaching toward heaven or simply repeating words that vanish into air. Historians still debate whether devotion in these times was deeply personal or mostly habitual, and you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Some nights you feel a spark of connection, but more often it is just another rhythm in the pattern of your life. When the prayers are over, supper arrives. A quieter affair, a smaller spread, the hall less crowded. Conversation dwindles to murmurs and candles sputter as if tired of holding their flame. You retreat once more to your chamber where the bed waits heavy and unyielding. You lie beneath its weight, staring into the dark, listening to the small sounds of the castle settling. Footsteps fading, shutters clapping against stone, the creak of beams in the wind. It is in this stillness that your mind wanders most. You think of other princesses, distant and nameless, living through their own long silences. Did they, too, count the stitches in their embroidery and measure the days by the tolling of bells? Did they dream of seas they would never cross, forests they would never walk, freedoms they would never taste? The monotony is a kind of inheritance, a crown invisible yet heavier than any of gold. And as sleep slowly takes you, you know that tomorrow will arrive like an echo, carrying the same cadence, the same duties, the same stillness. You wake again with that strange sense of déjà vu, as if the hours had not truly passed at all. The chill of the stone walls presses close, and the air carries the faint dampness of an old building that has known centuries of breath before yours. The shutters creak as they are opened, and the same pale gray light seeps into your chamber, soft yet unrelenting. It's another day, and you know without needing to ask what it will demand from you. The rhythms are so fixed they feel almost ritualistic, and you move through them with the practiced calm of someone who long ago stopped hopping for change. The servants bustle quietly, their presence a constant hum in the background of your life. You sometimes envy them. Though their labor is grueling, they at least move with urgency, their days filled with tasks that lead to completion. Your life is instead a circle, endlessly looping without progress. Today, the maid adjusts your gown, smoothing the heavy fabric across your shoulders, and you feel yourself disappear beneath its folds. Fashion, after all, is not just clothing but a cage of expectation. Historians still argue whether noblewomen found empowerment in their garments or only constraint, and you lean toward the latter as your bodice cinches tight. The first half of the morning is swallowed by instruction again. A priest guides you through prayers, his voice a steady monotone. He insists upon the importance of obedience, of humility, of remembering that a princess serves as a model for others. You mouth the words, and though you know their meaning, they drift past you like the sound of water running through a channel. It is in these moments that your mind slips sideways. You picture the ink-stained fingers of the monks in the scriptorium, laboring over texts they may not even understand, yet leaving behind the delicate curves of letters that will outlive them. You think how strange it is that something so dull in the moment becomes the thing scholars centuries later study with reverence. Perhaps the same will be said of you, that your uneventful days carried some hidden significance that you cannot see. Later, the hall stirs with the ritual of the midday meal. Trays of bread, trenchers of meat, pitchers of watered wine. It is all familiar, yet it carries a faint thrill for the servants who move quickly to ensure perfection. You sit at the high table, and though you speak little, your silence carries weight. A misplaced laugh, a careless word, even a pause too long in answering, each could be turned into gossip. So you maintain the expected poise, responding with careful phrases that neither invite nor reject conversation. This, too, is a kind of labor, invisible yet exhausting. You wonder if your father, the king, ever feels this same strain, or if power shields him from the monotony you endure. The afternoon stretches before you like an endless corridor. Embroidery lies waiting once more, threads spilling like quiet rivers across the fabric. You stitch flowers, saints, sometimes heraldic beasts. Your needle moves as though on its own, and after hours, your eyes blur until you can barely tell thread from cloth. You think of a curious tidbit once whispered by a tutor, that in some courts, women would weave tiny charms or coded symbols into their embroidery, messages hidden in plain sight. You toy with the idea, though your own rebellion would be so small it would likely go unnoticed forever. Yet even the thought of it sends a small spark of energy through your otherwise still afternoon. As the sun lowers, you are led to the gardens again. The air is cooler, scented with mint and sage, and birds dart between the hedges. The garden is meant to soothe, but you cannot help but notice its precision. Each plant placed where it should be, each pathway laid in neat symmetry. The natural world trimmed and ordered until it mirrors the very structure of your own life. You pause at the fountain once again, and today you drop a pebble into the water. The ripples spread outward, briefly disturbing the reflection, before fading into stillness. It feels like a metaphor you cannot quite name, but you cling to the image anyway. Evening prayers follow, thick with incense and the murmur of Latin phrases. The air in the chapel is heavy, and your thoughts drift even as your lips move in rhythm with the chant. You catch yourself wondering whether faith is more about repetition than belief. Historians still debate whether medieval devotion was rooted in true personal connection or simply the weight of habit, and as the words drone on, you think it may be impossible to separate the two. For you, it is a comfort and a cage at the same time. The final meal of the day is subdued. Candles sputter low, shadows lengthen, and voices soften until the hall feels like a place half asleep already. You sit quietly, eating just enough to satisfy expectation before returning to your chamber. The bed waits, its covers heavy, the silence nearly complete. Lying there, you listen for the sounds of the castle settling, the faint rustle of a guard's shift, the creak of a door, the low whistle of wind through the stones. Your mind drifts as sleep circles near. You imagine other princesses again, women across Europe bound by the same invisible threads of duty, living out lives that mirrored yours almost exactly. Did they, too, feel the weight of the endless repetition? Did they try to carve out small rebellions in private thoughts, secret stitches, fleeting gestures? Or did they simply surrender to the pattern, dissolving into the stillness until they became little more than names in chronicles? You will never know, but the thought lingers as your eyes close, carrying you into yet another cycle that begins where the last one ended. You wake once more to the same pale light sliding between the shutters, as if the world outside has only paused for a moment and resumed exactly where you left it. The weight of the bedding is familiar, the air chilled, the quiet so deep it feels almost rehearsed. A maid stirs the embers in the hearth, coaxing them back to life, and you realize how much your comfort depends on others' small labors. Without them, the chamber would be dark, cold, and entirely still. You sit up slowly, the heaviness of routine already pressing against you, as though the day ahead were an object set firmly upon your chest. Dressing again takes longer than it should, every layer a reminder that your body is more symbol than self. The gown must be immaculate, the hair arranged with precision, the small details polished into a presentation that belongs less to you and more to the role you occupy. You sometimes imagine how liberating it would be to wear the clothes of a peasant girl, woolen skirts, a rough tunic, something you could walk freely in without the constant tug of fabric and expectation. Historians still argue whether noblewomen ever envied the simpler lives of those beneath them, but you suspect the answer would be yes, if only in secret. Morning prayers are repeated, the same words in the same cadence. Yet today you notice the way the priest's voice cracks slightly when he grows tired, a human flaw that somehow makes the ritual feel less oppressive. You wonder if your own voice carries imperfections that others notice in you, or if your silence has kept you too hidden for them to see at all. The prayers blur into a rhythm that soothes and numbs in equal measure, and you let them wash over you like the tolling of bells in the distance. After prayers, lessons fill the morning. Reading, music, the endless practice of grace. Today, a tutor speaks of heraldry, pointing out the meaning behind the colors and symbols that adorn banners and shields. Gold for generosity, red for courage, blue for loyalty. He insists that these designs are more than decoration. They are codes that announce who you are before you even speak. You trace the patterns with your eyes, half engaged, and wonder what symbol would truly represent you. Perhaps not a lion or a fleur-de-lis, but something quieter, like a locked door or an hourglass. There's a fringe tidbit you once overheard, that some families would secretly alter their heraldry to send messages of alliance or defiance, small rebellions etched into the very fabric of identity. You imagine hiding your own truths in such a language, a code only you would understand. The midday meal comes, and with it the endless practice of composure. You sip delicately, chew slowly, laugh softly at the appropriate moments. You know this is less about nourishment and more about performance, every gesture a sign of breeding. Even the way you fold your hands or tilt your head could be read as a statement of character. You wonder how exhausting it must be for those who watch you, analyzing every small detail, yet you suspect they relish it. For them, your life is entertainment, while for you, it is an endless play with no curtain call. The afternoon is given to embroidery once more. Your fingers move with skill born of repetition, the needle sliding in and out of cloth like breath. You craft a border of vines, and in their curling shapes you see something almost alive. It strikes you how much of your world is designed to mimic life while restraining it. The gardens shaped into order, the tapestries frozen in motion, even your own smile rehearsed until it no longer belongs to you. Historians still debate whether embroidery was a form of quiet power for noblewomen, a way to inscribe themselves onto history, or simply another cage disguised as artistry. As your thread tightens, you suspect it was both. Later, the gardens beckon again. You walk the same paths, but today you notice the way the bees move from flower to flower with a purpose you lack. Their tiny world hums with energy, while yours remains subdued, careful, measured. You pause near the fountain once more, watching the water spill over the carved edges. It is always in motion, yet never truly changes. Perhaps it is the perfect emblem of your existence. Movement without progress, beauty without freedom. You drop another pebble, and the ripples fade just as quickly as yesterday's, as though time itself has learned to erase even your smallest acts. Evening falls, and with it another round of prayers. The chapel glows in candlelight, shadows flickering across stone saints whose faces remain forever serene. The air is heavy with incense, the smoke curling like ghostly ribbons toward the ceiling. You kneel, lips moving in words that have become muscle memory. You think briefly of the countless generations who have done the same, all of them kneeling, repeating, believing, or at least obeying. Some say faith was the anchor of the medieval world. Others suggest it was simply habit woven into every hour. For you, it feels like both at once, comfort and confinement inseparable. The final meal passes, and your chamber awaits once more. You sink into the bed, its familiarity both soothing and suffocating. Lying there, you think about all the princesses across time, each caught in her own cycle of duty, each bound by threads of expectation she could not cut. Did they feel the same restless silence? Did they dream of breaking free? Or did they surrender so fully that their very thoughts fell in line with the patterns of their days? Your eyes close, and the stillness of the night enfolds you. Tomorrow will come, and it will look like today, and yet you know you will endure it because that is what you have always done. Somewhere deep inside, though, you hold on to the smallest ember of thought, that even in repetition there is meaning, even in silence there is a voice, and even in stillness there is a story waiting to be told. Day opens in precisely the same way, with the pale gray light filtering through shutters and the faint rustle of a maid preparing the fire. You rise from the bed, and once again you feel the weight of expectation pressing down before you've even placed both feet on the floor. The chamber is familiar, the air cool, the silence so absolute it seems to press in from every corner. There is a peculiar comfort in that sameness, yet also a quiet despair, like being trapped inside a painting where the figures never move. You stretch your arms, knowing the ritual of dressing will begin at once, and the layers of fabric will once more transform you into something symbolic rather than personal. As the gown settles around you, heavy and intricate, you think of how strange it is to live as both an individual and a vessel. Your own feelings must always yield to the image others demand. Today the brocade is stiff and decorated with tiny metallic threads that catch the light in small sparks. You consider how absurd it would look if you walked barefoot into the garden wearing such finery, mud gathering at the hem. The thought almost makes you laugh, though you hold it inside. Historians still argue whether princesses were entirely sheltered or sometimes bent the rules in private moments, sneaking into kitchens or slipping outdoors unnoticed. The records say very little, which makes you wonder if silence in the chronicles is the surest proof such things happened at all. Prayers follow the same cadence, the same words, though today you feel them more like an echo than a song. You murmur along, eyes half closed, and wonder how much of faith is true belief and how much is repetition drilled into the bones. A priest reads a passage on obedience, his voice steady, and you imagine him practicing it the night before like a bard rehearsing lines. The incense drifts upward, and you remember a strange tidbit. In some courts, it was said that incense not only honored the divine, but also masked the smell of unwashed bodies crowded in chapels. That detail always makes you think differently about the sacred clouds. Less heavenly fragrance, more medieval air freshener. The morning lessons return to music, your lute resting across your lap. Your tutor insists on precision, each string plucked exactly, each chord deliberate. Yet as your fingers move, you let one or two notes drift in slightly off time, just enough to give it life. No one notices, or if they do, they don't comment. You wonder what it would be like to play without scrutiny, to let the melody race ahead, wild and unmeasured. Perhaps one day you will find the courage to try when no ears are listening. Scholars debate whether women in noble courts were permitted true artistry, or simply expected to parrot what they had been taught. And you think that debate will never be resolved because the truth lies hidden in the spaces no one wrote down. The midday meal feels more like an obligation than a feast. Today a roasted bird appears, its skin crisp and fragrant. You take a bite, and the taste is rich, but you barely register it because the real task is sitting gracefully, nodding at the right remarks, avoiding any trace of clumsiness. Meals are less about food and more about signaling refinement, you realize, though your stomach does remind you of its presence in quiet growls between courses. There's something absurd about a table full of dishes when your appetite is treated as a footnote. You think of the peasants who would see such a spread as a dream. Then you think of how much of it you cannot enjoy because you are too busy being watched. The afternoon brings embroidery again, the needle glinting in the lamplight as your fingers press rhythm into fabric. You decide to stitch not just vines but small shapes hidden within them, symbols that only you would recognize. A crooked star, a loop that resembles an eye, a petal shaped more like a tear. In this tiny rebellion, you create a language no one else will read, and for a moment the monotony feels like canvas for something secret. Historians still argue whether embroidery was purely decorative, or whether women used it to encode their own voices into otherwise silent rooms. With each thread you tighten, you're convinced it's the latter. When you walk in the gardens again, the breeze is softer. the air carrying the faintest hint of earth and blossom. You pause near a bed of roses, leaning closer to inhale, but the thorns remind you of the hidden sharpness in beauty. A bee hovers so near you can feel the buzz in your chest, and you think of its freedom, its path chosen moment to moment with no regard for ceremony. For a second you close your eyes and imagine following its flight instead of the narrow path beneath your shoes. But when you open them, the stones are still there, and so is the expectation that your steps remain precise. Evening brings another round of prayer, candles flickering, shadows stretching like long fingers across the floor. The words tumble out almost unconsciously now, like reciting a poem so often you no longer hear its meaning. You wonder if the saints carved in stone ever tire of watching people kneel before them, if they secretly crave silence instead of constant devotion. A strange thought, maybe, but one that makes you smile faintly in the dimness. The truth is, prayer brings both weight and ease, the heaviness of duty, the softness of repetition. It is impossible to decide whether it imprisons or comforts, and maybe that's why it endures. The final meal drifts past with little variation, though the chatter tonight feels louder, as though everyone is fighting the creeping stillness of the evening with sound. You sit quietly, a polite smile in place, and let their words pass over you like a tide you have no desire to swim in. When the hall empties, relief settles over you, the kind that comes only when you know you will not be observed for a few hours. At last the chamber calls, the bed waiting as it always does. You slip beneath the covers, the fabric cool against your skin, and stare at the canopy overhead. Your mind drifts to questions that have no answers. Did other princesses lie awake the same way, counting the patterns on the ceiling beams, imagining lives beyond their walls? Did they feel, as you do now, that their days blurred into a single thread stitched endlessly across the loom of time? You cannot know, but you suspect they did. And that thought brings both loneliness and kinship. The room grows darker, quieter, softer. The fire settles into glowing coals, the shadows stretching long, then fading. Your breath slows. The sameness that weighed heavily on you through the day now wraps itself around you like a lullaby, predictable, steady, inescapable. Tomorrow will repeat, but tonight that repetition feels almost kind. The world fades gently as you drift further into stillness. Imagine the corridors of the castle, empty now, their stones cool and silent, every echo softened until it disappears entirely. Picture the gardens beneath the moonlight, flowers folding themselves into rest, the fountain whispering in a voice so hushed it barely exists. The tapestries on the walls remain unmoving, their colors muted in the darkness, holding their quiet scenes without expectation or demand. Everything is softened, slowed, unrushed. Your breath moves in and out, steady, effortless, like the tide lapping gently at the shore. Each inhale gathers what weight remains from the day, and each exhale lets it slip away, falling into the stillness that cradles you. The noise of duty, the press of expectation, the endless rhythm of repetition, all of it grows dim, until it is no more than a faint memory at the edge of thought. There is only the hush of the night, the softness of the air, the certainty that the world will keep turning whether or not you move with it. You are safe, you are still, you are part of something timeless. The life of the princess, the life of anyone, is just one thread among countless others, and tonight that thread rests, loosened, unburdened, floating gently in the dark. So let your eyes grow heavy, let the quiet surround you, and allow yourself to sink into the deepest, calmest sleep. The story holds itself now, and you are free to let go. Sweet dreams.